Hello, I hope you're having a nice day. Today I'd like to talk about the possibilities of six-wheeled cars in Formula 1. In the background it's just me drawing a Tyrrell P34. I didn't really have any ideas for background footage for this discussion, so I figured I'd get some drawing practice in. So that's that. Sorry it's not very good. I'm thinking about this discussion in terms of a modern F1 setting. Obviously Tyrrell did it for aerodynamic reasons, hiding the front wheels behind the front wing to reduce drag and the tyre weight coming off of it. In terms of modern F1s, I don't think that's really possible or a viable solution. So, yeah, some of the considerations are going to be different. I also think this would be highly unlikely to happen, at least without two major things. First of all, the FIA would have to specifically allow this to happen. Interestingly, in the Appendix J, or the Formula 1 regulations, a car is defined as having at least four wheels, meaning they aren't totally ruling out the idea, but then there's also a rule specifically limiting four wheels. You can't have any more or any less. So there's that. That's the obvious thing that would need to change, and I'd imagine there's possibly a couple of other rules that would maybe have to change as well with that. The other thing is that since there's only a single tyre supplier, it's going to be some other regulations changing as well. Do you like the amount of tyres a team is allowed to have per weekend, possibly, or things like the number of front wheels or front tyres given to a team? And obviously, since Pirelli is the sole supplier, they probably have the right to refuse if a team asked for more than four wheels for their car and for wind tunnel models and things like that. That would also probably raise some red flags if one team was doing that. So now let's talk about the good and the bad. Now the good to me feels fairly obvious. So first of all, you're going to have more grip, more mechanical grip, which is the significant part about it. Because the grip comes specifically from the tyres, that means that it's unaffected by the cars, unlike aerodynamic grip, which requires there to be clean air coming out of the car. With having more tyres, the grip's just from mechanical bonds and chemical bonds on the tyres, keeping the car to the road. There is potentially some ways that other cars can affect it, because in Formula 1, due to the construction of the tyres and the fact that it's trying to be strategy focused, tyres do have a habit of overheating when following other cars. But the other thing is that because you've got more tyres and the loads are being spread through more wheels, and that means that you have softer springs and there's less energy going through the wheels themselves and the tyres and the suspension, there's likely going to be less tyre wear, and less heat going through the tyres. So that would potentially balance out any sort of issue with cooling down the tyres. There, or at least I'd imagine so. Obviously I don't have all the tyre data, but yeah, potentially those would balance out, so you'd end up having more grip and less tyre wear. And now on to disadvantages. So yeah, the first one that comes to mind is that there's going to be more dirty air caused by having more wheels. Mostly because of this thing called tyre squirt. As the wheel is moving forward, air has to get around it somehow. Some of the air is forced under the wheel, which is then crushed as the tyre rolls forward and is squirted out the side. So that's basically tyre squirt in short, which is turbulent air. So it makes it harder for cars to follow because the air is then more messy than it otherwise would be, and a big part of Formula 1 is being able to control the tyre squirt. There's also, with more wheels, you'd get more turbulent air from coming off the spokes on the wheels and things like that. So there's more problems there in terms of following other cars with aerodynamic grip. I'd also think that this would actually increase the spread across the grid between teams, since a main advantage, or one of the big advantages of the top teams, is being able to model and accurately predict where the vortexes are going to come from to help control the tyre squirt. The interaction between the aerodynamics of the car and the tyres is hugely important. So yeah, being able to control the tyre squirt, which the big teams can do, means that having more wheels gives them a bigger advantage. So lower down teams like Haas or Williams might drop down even further compared to the likes of Mercedes and Red Bull, who have turned it into an art. Now, the other thing that I see as less of a disadvantage, but I know other people might, is that the cars would have to become bigger and heavier with these extra wheels. Now I know back in the 70s and 80s, those six-wheeled cars, the concept cars, stuff like the March 246, Ferrari 312 T6, and of course the Tyrrell P34, they weren't massive, but the thing is now standards for safety have changed, and also, teams have seen the advantages of having bigger cars. So if you're going to have another axle that's producing a lot of messy air, you're going to want to position it in a way that doesn't affect the aerodynamics at all, if you can. So you're going to have to spread the car out and make it bigger, which I know a lot of people aren't a fan of. I will say I don't think the extra weight will make the cars less agile and nimble, since you've got a lot of extra tyre grip to offset that. Of course, you've got the weight as unsprung mass, which is an issue, because unsprung mass is generally less good in terms of road holding, easy for me to say, and just generally being able to use weight transfer and things like that. It's not very good there, but does it really matter when you've got a lot of extra grip? I don't think so. And finally, just want to touch upon a couple of interesting details and things like that. I had a thought about how I'd package six wheels onto a Formula 1 car. So I think first of all, positioning of the third axle. I don't think you'd be able to mount it anywhere in the centre of the car, so where the driver's sitting or where the engine is. So that rules out that area completely, because you'd want an anti-roll bar linking the two wheels together, and I think it'd be too difficult to try and package it around the engine or around where the driver's sitting to ever use that sort of area. So in that case, then you'd either have to mount it in front of where the driver's sitting or behind the engine where the gearbox is. Now, I don't think you'd do it in front of the driver because you'd want sufficient space between the front wheels and the barge boards. If it's not far enough away, then you have a situation similar to McLaren in 2018, where they didn't have enough space between the front wheels and the barge boards, and so the air, whenever there was any amount of steering angle put in, the barge boards weren't sort of reacting with the air the way they had intended it to, and the car was losing significant downforce. So that means that you'd have the third axle at the back of the car. I think the final axle, the rearmost axle, would always be the powered one, because that way then you can take most advantage of weight transfer under acceleration. So as you accelerate forward, weight transfers backwards onto the rearmost wheel, so you get the most grip that way. What I could see being done is to have one of the two rear axles be pure electric and the other one to be for the internal combustion engine. That way then it helps encourage having the hybrid system and you dedicate it to an entire axle, which would be interesting. I could also see something where just the second rear axle being used purely for electric regen. So, for example, in Formula E at the moment, I think they're trialling, in the Gen 3 car, I believe they're going to have it so the front axle works to regenerate electricity, but it doesn't actually give power itself. I could see Formula 1 doing something similar with that. Although I think in Formula 1's case, they'd allow you to power the axle both ways, both using it to regen and to power. There are already rumours and things like that about using the front wheels to both regenerate and give power, but there's the whole case of packaging it and whatnot, so I don't know if that'll really happen, but there's something being talked about in the 2025 regulation changes. And if they really wanted to change the regulations, what they could do is allow wings to be placed behind one of the axles, because if you put a wing behind a wheel, you actually get an effect similar to the Coanda effect, where the flow wants to stay attached for longer, which is interesting. There's an article about it from a regulation change that was proposed back in 2006 or something. It was like mid-2000s. Planned to be, instead of having the 2009 rule changes, this was proposed, where they were going to have two wings, one for each rear wheel, to try and help deal with dirty air. Didn't go through in the end, obviously, but yeah, in that they have an interesting picture of a wing behind a rotating wheel. And yeah, I think maybe something like that could be done. Anyway, thank you for watching. Remember to subscribe to Boost and Ethanol for more. Leave a like if you've enjoyed, and until next video, goodbye.